these gods were actually aliens that came from Nibiru. They actually believed that these diamonds came from the moon. It was believed that these diamonds were reincarnated on Earth and that they came down from the moon.
So welcome to today's episode, in which we take a very deep dive into the question as to whether the Nephilim were aliens. We explore different interpretations of the Sumerian tradition and the theory of their origins from Nibiru. Well, Philly, you've connected the Sumerian term Anunna to the sons of El in Semitic traditions. Can you walk us through why that makes you see the Anunnaki more like fallen gods or divine beings rather than aliens from another planet?
Yeah, so the link between the Anunnaki and the sons of God in biblical tradition is very important. We do find in biblical tradition the terminology sons of God. It's actually in Genesis 6 we read it was the sons of God that fathered the Nephilim with human girls. So this same tradition actually corresponds with very old traditions in ancient Sumeria. Ancient Sumer, we find, for example, Anunnaki, the terminology Anunnaki, which is actually the equivalent for sons of God. Anunna, which is actually the name, the key is just a reference to the earth, means the seed of the prince. And in the early days, the prince referred to An, the father of the gods. So the seed of the father of the gods, that's exactly the same as the sons of God in the biblical tradition.
Yeah, and there's a number of other sources that talk about seed being spilled onto the ground and, these children being raised.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's relevant to the idea of fallen gods. So the Anunnaki are basically equivalent terminology for gods. That's just the gods in the ancient world. And we do find, for example, in Sumerian tradition, in the Sumerian king list, that the dynasty of Uruk was believed to have been descended from the gods. So that's basically the equivalent tradition for what we find in the Bible, where we read that the Nephilim were descendants of the sons of God and the daughters of man. Now, the question of the aliens entering this picture is that some of those researchers that believe that the Anunnaki actually refers to aliens also make the link with the biblical sons of God. But what they argue is that the Anunna or Anunnaki was actually aliens that came to Earth. Now, from a biblical perspective, what we find is that the Supreme God and the sons of the Supreme God, sons here is basically just a generic term, just a way to present it. And from a biblical perspective, they are created beings. They are just gods.
Yes.
So we find, for example, in Psalm 82, in verse 6, we read, I said, you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Now, children of the Most High is the exact equivalent term for sons of God.
Yes.
So the sons of God are just the gods. That's the old terminology that we have throughout the ancient Middle East. It's the gods. The same way the Anunnaki is just the gods. So in this view, the gods that came to Earth was aliens or were aliens. Now, from a biblical perspective, God is the creator of all these beings, called gods in the older biblical tradition, but in the later tradition, they are called angels. So all the angelic beings, all the spiritual beings, God created them. And as such, this is the perspective that we have as Christians when discussing this issue.
Yep.
But in this alternative view, these are just aliens. And An himself, the supreme God, was just an alien that came to Earth. So that stands in opposition to the Christian view of God being the creator, standing outside of creation and having created all the gods, or in the later terminology, all the angelic beings.
Yeah.
So this is the difference between the two views, and we'll also now proceed to, delve a little bit deeper into the aliens' perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. And I can just mention in Job 1 verse 6 and 2 verse 1, the sons of God came to present themselves to the Lord. So the setting is the heavenly council for those that are interested in the heavenly council.
yeah.
And we've talked
Sons of
about
God,
that.
the terminology is often associated with the council, the divine council, the council of God, in the Bible.
Absolutely. And we've mentioned that in previous podcasts. So, So, Vili, you mentioned Enki being called a prince, and now some stories treat the Anunnaki as his kids. What does that say about the power dynamics among these gods, especially the ones linked to Earth?
Yeah, so in ancient Sumer, on the one hand, we had the supreme god, the father of the gods, An. An's name actually means the most high, the highest god, and he was definitely worshipped in a different way from the other gods. We know this because, for example, the name An, it's just, the cuneiform just as 4 wedges forming a star. This is his name. It's the same word or sign that was used for heaven or for gods.
Yes.
Dinga, the gods in Sumer. So all the gods took their essence, so to say, being gods, from this god, which his name is just God, or An.
Yes.
So An is definitely on a different level. He's the father of the gods. He stands apart from the other gods. And then in opposition to An, we find the god Enki. Now, Enki was the god of the Sumerians. His name means the Lord of the earth, or he was worshipped at Eridu. And in the ancient traditions, we read about the seed of An that fell on the ground, which refers to the fallen gods. And later on, this was associated with Enki. So his seed was said to have fallen on the ground. And then some of the Anunnaki were then said to be his children.
Yes.
Now, we've discussed this in great detail in our episode about the Anunnaki, but the fallen gods were, for the most part, associated with diamonds that resided in the in tombs, in the burial tombs.
Yes.
And we've given some examples from ancient Sumerian literature. So, and this is closely linked with the whole story about the Nephilim. Because they were also linked with these kind of diamonds. So what we have is, in this ancient tradition, we already find a conflict where, if this total mythos are brought together in the different traditions that we find in Egypt, among the Hurrians, in Sumer, even in Greece and other places later on, then we find that it's actually Enki that was in rebellion against the supreme god, and that led to the gods becoming some gods that follow him, becoming fallen gods. So this is basically a very early motive that corresponds with the later motive of Satan and the rebellion against God and the angels that followed Satan. And in the Revelation, instead of the seed that fell on the god, we read about the stars that fell on the earth, which is the exact equivalent, because of the fact that gods were often associated with stars, as we'll also see later on in this episode. So this conflict in heaven, again, is consistent with the biblical perspective and the biblical view of things.
Absolutely. Consistent with the biblical view, as well as the older traditions that we look at. So, and it just aligns beautifully. So the whole alien Anunnaki thing has blown up lately with ties to the Nephilim and ideas about them sharing secret tech. How do you push back on those stakes that rely on early Sumerian translations? Big, interesting point.
Yeah, so again, in this view, the Anunnaki are regarded as the children of the aliens. And this corresponds closely with biblical tradition in the sense of these skills that was handed down to the Nephilim is not only found in ancient tradition with regard to the fallen gods,
Yes.
where the sages, not the different sages, that's us human sages, but the group of 7 sages, they are regarded as superhuman beings, and they are regarded as the ones that had this amazing knowledge that they teach to humans. And it's quite likely that in the book of Enoch, it was this tradition that was borrowed from in Babylonian times and even later in Persian times with regard to this knowledge, this angelic knowledge that was associated with the Nephilim.
And I can just mention the 7 sages you referred to. They're called the Apkallu, and they, according to let's call it legend, they were semi-divine culture bearers sent by the gods before the flood to civilize humanity.
Before and after, because they were also involved with the building of the walls of Uruk in the time of Gilgamesh, according to tradition.
Yes.
But this is the group of 7 wises, sages. So it should not be confused with the different sages, human sages associated with the different rulers of ancient Mesopotamia.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to the aliens, the view is that it was these gods were actually aliens that came from Nibiru. Now, Nibiru is actually a term that we do find in ancient Sumerian texts. So, in a sense, what is said is that, Nibiru in these texts refers to a certain planet, and that these aliens came from that particular planet to the Earth. Now, actually, Nibiru is an ancient term. It is definitely used in Sumerian and Akkadian literature, but it's an astronomical term. It refers to it means the crossing place of transition. It most likely refers to the equinox, and it refers to planets in different positions in the sky. And crossing point is when they move, for example, past the equinox. So it doesn't have any relation to a planet.
So can I say it's almost like a celestial marker?
Yeah, so it's definitely a technical term used by the ancient Sumerians within the framework of astronomy. And the planets is often associated with Jupiter.
Yeah.
For example, and the position of Jupiter in the celestial skies. That's what we often find. So there's no doubt about it. This was a misreading. It was not the correct reading.
Yes.
So what is interesting, they believed, some of these early researchers believed that these aliens came from this planet, Nibiru, and that they then came to Earth and was called later on Anunnaki or gods, and that it was they who fathered the Nephilim. Zecharia Sitchin, for example, he had this view, this particular theory.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting in Sumerian times, it is true that the gods were definitely linked with the starry heavens, with particular stars, for example. Ishtar was linked with Venus. Nergal-Era was linked to Mars. So different gods was definitely associated with different stars and even planets. And we even find, for example, with regard to the Pleiades, that the 7 stars of the Pleiades were associated with those gods that was born in human form, in the form of the 7 young men that accompanied Lugalbanda, which was regarded as a great shaman.
Yeah.
So we do have this link with the starry heavens. But at that stage in history, they did not see these angelic beings as residing on a planet or on a star or whatsoever. This came later on.
Yes.
So in Roman times, for example, the view developed that the diamonds, as they were now called, these gods, actually resides, for example, on the planets. Every planet had a certain diamond in the Hermetic tradition. We find that. And I can quote an author, a Roman author, Plutarch. He actually wrote about this slightly after the time of Christ. He wrote, let me just read. Yeah, and they actually believe that these diamonds came from the moon.
Yeah. And just to interject, I mean, when you look at these ideas, talking about a planet, it basically originated almost entirely with Zecharia Sitchin, and it was incorrect translation.
Yeah.
So
let me read this piece.
Yeah.
Yet not forever do the diamonds, these kind of spirits, tarry upon the moon. They came down hither in order to take charge of oracles, and they are present at and take part in the highest orgiastic initiatory rites, and they are chasteners and watchers over wrongdoings, and they shine as saviors in battle and at sea. So here we have a very good example of these diamonds coming down, for example, and this is especially within the context of reincarnation. So it was believed that these diamonds were reincarnated on Earth and that they came down from the moon. So this perspective was later on reworked in terms of aliens, that they are aliens that resided on Nibiru, which was seen as another 12th planet, and so forth. But Nibiru is not a planet, and in my opinion, this view of them being aliens doesn't have good support in history, and it's not the kind of view that we find in ancient Sumer, definitely not.
So it's not a hidden planet on a 3,600-year orbit or the homeworld of the Anunnaki. So
exactly.
Over the years, we've talked at length about shamanistic and spirit world traditions. So why do you feel this is a stronger fit for this whole?
Yeah, so we do find that in ancient Sumer, that the fallen gods was closely linked with the image of the snake, of the serpent. And at Eridu, the city of Enki that I've just referred to, the imagery, the serpent kind of imagery is it's found all over the place. And even Enki himself is described as a serpent, and his wife or his consort Ninhursag is also described as a serpent. So in this context, it explains why the serpent was so closely linked with the fallen gods tradition. Because Enki, he is the god that led the rebellion, and his seed, or the gods that followed him, they are then closely linked with the serpent terminology. Yeah.
So something that's always fascinated me is the Ubaid Figurines from around Eridu, like the one showing a woman breastfeeding a baby with lizard or serpent-like features. Yeah,
exactly.
And that keeps getting tied into the alien lizard people theory. Why do you think it's really rooted in ancient shamanistic tradition instead?
Yeah, so this woman breastfeeding the baby corresponds exactly what we read about Ninhursag, the consort of Enki. In the Kesh hymn, that's the Kesh temple hymn, that's the oldest hymn available to us. And the oldest version dates from about 2500 BC. We read about Ninhursag, and we read that she is like a great dragon or serpent that sits in its interior, in the interior of the temple.
Yeah.
Now, Ninhursag sitting in the interior of the temple actually goes back to earlier shamanistic traditions, where the shamans observed a woman at the bottom, at the roots of the tree. She was naked and had bare breasts, and her lower body was that of a serpent. So it goes back to very early shamanistic traditions. In my view, this is also the tradition that was taken over in the Bible, in Genesis in the garden story where the snake appeared to Eve, but that's a different discussion. We won't go into that today. So what we read, for example, in another passage from later Mesopotamian tradition is the following. She wears a head ornament, she wears a fly, she wears a veil, her breast is open. In her left arm she holds a babe sucking her breast. And then it continues from her head to her loins. The body is that of a naked woman, from the loins to the sole of the feet, scales like that of a snake are visible. Her name is Nintu. Nintu is just the same as Ninhursag. So this is that corresponds with the description. So we have good reason to believe that these figurines were connected with shamanism, and especially the kind of shamanism associated with the netherworld.
Yes.
There is also a different kind of shamanism that was associated with the sky. For example, in the case of Lugalbanda, he's associated with that kind of shamanism and is described as having been born as a shaman in the nest of an eagle, of an Anzu bird. So we do find that also, that kind of shamanism. But with regard to the netherworld, there was a large cemetery close to Eridu, and it's most likely that those spirits, those diamonds that was associated with the netherworld in that region was linked with the image of the serpent. And in ancient Sumerian tradition, the netherworld was closely linked. That's the one image that's the closest link with the netherworld was that of the serpent.
Yeah. And I see some conservative sort of scholarly interpretations refer to the life and death cycles as well, and the whole concept around regeneration and which is really, really interesting. So Willie, Eridu has this big, as we already know, this big serpent theme going on, from marshes being called Snake Marsh. I would definitely not go in there, to all those clay serpent figures buried under the temple from the Ubaid days. How does that serpent stuff connect to seeing the Anunnaki as demons or spirits tied to burial mounds?
Yeah, so I've already mentioned the Anunnaki is described, for example, in the epic, The Death of Gilgamesh. They are described as residing in the burial mounds. And this is one way that they are described, but when it comes to the imagery, they are depicted as serpents, or this is the kind of, in the netherworld, in the burial mounds, this is the typical kind of depiction of these kind of deceased ancestors and diamonds.
Yeah. And what do you think it reveals about how early Sumerians thought about the spirit world or the afterlife?
Yeah, so we find a very strong influence, Sumerian shamanistic influence in ancient Sumer. For example, the shaman's tree with the eagle in the top and the snake at the bottom. So there's no doubt, that this tradition was deeply, especially the oldest Sumerian tradition, was very, very deeply influenced by shamanism.
Yeah.
And the snake kind of shamanism was associated with the netherworld. Presumably the shaman, in this case, went down into the netherworld, whereas the other kind of shaman would go up to the upper world. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. This has been a really interesting discussion. Any final thoughts or anything you wanted to point out?
Yeah, so what we're talking about today fits in nicely with our overall theme in the 9 ages. In this, where we discussed all these, especially starting with these early traditions, Sumerian traditions, and especially the heroic traditions, and the Nephilim tradition is closely linked with these heroic traditions. And we are discussing the antediluvian period, the time before the deluge. We've discussed the deluge. We'll also discuss the post-diluvian period in much more detail. And these things clearly fit into our larger project of going into detail with all these particular aspects of this early tradition and later on also later tradition. For example, the Akkadian period, even later on the Canaanite period, etc. So I think this is very relevant to the issues that we are discussing on this channel.
And there's some fascinating stuff coming down the line. So, for people new to the channel, where can they go for some additional information?
Yeah, so we have some, as I've mentioned, with the previous video is about the Anunnaki. So if they're interested in the Anunnaki, they can look, they can watch that one, and there's many others. So must go and have a look at the playlist. There's some very interesting stuff there, I believe.
And the books, really,
Yeah.
I love the Nine Ages. I love the trilogy. It's just such a nice reference
Yeah.
source, and I keep going back.
Yeah, it's available
Yes,
on Amazon. They
yes,
can have a look there, yeah.
fantastic. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for your time today. I really look forward to the next one.
Yes, it was nice talking to you.
And please, people, like and subscribe. We're building a community, and I have to say it's growing steadily. So thank you very much.